Welcome to the Peak Mental Performance Podcast with Joe Shalero, optimizing your mental health and athletic performance one episode at a time.
Welcome everybody to the Peak Mental Performance series. This is our first kind of episode. Joe Shalero here with elitefts, and I'm here with Dr. Steve Grafe, who is a licensed counseling and sports psychologist for the Ohio State University Athletics. He has his PhD in counseling and psychology from the University of Akron, which is actually where I went to.
No way.
Yeah, and we actually have a few team members that went to Akron. And he's also a former Division I athlete himself. So I think the combination of having the PhD in psychology and counseling, but then also being able to speak from the athlete perspective, I think is pretty cool. And he was a member of the 2002 National Championship team at Ohio State. So thanks for being here today, Steve.
Yeah, man, my pleasure. Really looking forward to chatting with you.
Absolutely. So the reason that we want to start this series is, even as much as sports psychology has really grown in the last 20 or 30 years, there's still a lot of coaches and athletes that have a lot of misconceptions about sports psychology and mental health in general. Particularly the individual athletes like that we deal with, a lot of strength athletes, they don't have a team psychologist. They really kind of lack a lot of those resources. So the goal of this series is to kind of go into talking to some different professionals in sports psychology, in medicine, athletes and coaches, and hit on some of these areas that can help improve athlete performance, but then also just improve general mental health in general too. So we're going to hit on some cool topics today, try and get into some things that I think apply to a lot of people. We'll start off with just kind of some general sports psych stuff and then get into some different, performance anxiety, depression during times of the year, competitively, things like that. So to just kind of start off, can you give everyone an idea of what is sports psychology for those who don't really know a whole lot about it?
Yeah, absolutely. So sports psychology is really an umbrella term. So under that, if you might imagine, sports psychology is up here. There's kind of two subcomponents that's underneath that. There's the performance-based sports psychology, and then there's the clinical sports psychology. And the performance-based sports psychology, if you think about any performance, whether you're singing on stage or you're throwing a football or you're lifting a weight, there's 5 aspects to that. There's the physical aspect, so you have to be, in the case of lifting, physically strong, kind of biomechanically correct, and have kind of the physical resources to be able to do what you got to do. There's a technical aspect, so that's really more where the biomechanically correct piece kind of comes in, is we want to make sure that we're having proper lifting techniques so we don't get hurt, and there's strategies and ways and techniques to be able to do that effectively. There's the tactical component, which is kind of the strategic piece, where if you're trying to do a 1 rep max, you're not going to start off with that weight right off the bat. You might hurt yourself, so that you build up and periodize and progress to that ultimate weight. There's a social component, so you want to be able to get along well with your other kind of lifting buddies or your training coach or whoever it might be. And then finally, there's the mental component. And the mental component, if you ask a lot of guys, acknowledge that there's very much a mental aspect of performance, but they don't spend or they don't know how to spend the deliberate time working on that. So what we mean by the mental aspect of performance are a few different things. One would be like developing confidence. I know I can get this weight. I know I can be a competitive lifter. The other might be composure. So maybe it's you have an opportunity to go out and perform, and it's a competition, and you want to be able to calm the nerves, right, that the pressure gets on. Or it's been a long week, you got other shit going on. How do you pump yourself up to get a good training workout in, which can equally be a bit difficult. And concentration. So being able to focus on the things that you need to focus on when you need to focus on them. So coaches do a great job of identifying that in athletes. Like, oh gosh, if you were just more confident, you'd be great. Or focus, focus, focus. Or my favorite is, will you just relax? And they don't offer any real skills or suggestions on how to actually do that. For sports psychologists in general psychology, we've identified intervention and skills to be able to develop those particular traits, which we can talk more about. The other aspect of this, as you mentioned in your intro, is the clinical piece. And just because we're big, strong, fast, nimble, flexible athletes doesn't mean that we don't struggle with shit in our lives. And life can throw things at us whether we want it to or not. So, as a licensed psychologist, I'm able to address, diagnose, treat psychological concerns such as depression, anxiety, adjusting to a new career, a breakup, grieving the loss of something, trying to decide what you want to ultimately do in life. So there's a lot of things that can derail us from the life that we want to live, and the clinical piece, that focus is something that we can help as a sports psychologist to be able to get people back on the right track.
Yeah, that's great. And I think what a lot of people don't understand is how interconnected both of those are. So like, I think sometimes people tend to think like, okay, well, psychology is only if like I'm schizophrenic or have a severe mental illness. It's like, no, you could be totally, you could be mentally well, but still be able to improve your performance with mental techniques. Like you said, it feeds into so many things that we do as athletes. And then on the flip side too, if you have a mental illness, or you have even just like generalized anxiety, or you have seasonal depression, those things in turn will affect your performance. So, you should handle those things because you want to improve your quality of life. But even if you think you're being a badass by putting them off, it's going to come back and mess up your performance too. And I think that's what a lot of people kind of block out of their head a little bit.
It's kind of the Venn diagram, right?
Yeah,
where you
absolutely.
have like your performance-based stuff and the clinical-based stuff, but there's that significant overlap. And if we're not handling our stuff out of the gym, that's going to come into the gym. And conversely, if we don't manage and handle things that are going on in the gym, bad performances, that can also translate over into life outside of the gym too. So it's important to keep both things in check.
Absolutely. So I mentioned a little bit earlier that I think a lot of coaches and athletes, and I know, I've come a long way kind of in recent time, but years ago I had a lot of misconceptions about psychology, about counseling, about all those things. What are some common, you've been on the field with other athletes at a high level. What are some common misconceptions you think athletes have about just like the field of psychology? When they hear those words, what do you see people kind of getting from that?
Yeah, well, that they think they're fucking crazy, right? Yeah. And which isn't the case, or they think that when they come in, we're going to talk about their feelings, right? And don't get me wrong, I mean, it's an important, where else can you just unload stuff? So there is some value in processing feelings, but it's more about just talking about the stuff that's going on in our life and trying to, the way I talk about it is we're like throwing puzzle pieces down, we're kind of spewing out the puzzle pieces onto the floor, and then we're flipping over the puzzle pieces to create a nice picture that we can further understand ourselves, other people, and how to make the most out of life. So the one misconception is that I'm crazy. No, not necessarily true. Majority of us are just worried well, just struggling a little bit, need to get back on the path. The other is that we're strictly going to talk about feelings, and that's not true. Yeah, that's part of it, but then we're also going to talk about different ways of thinking, different ways of perceiving our particular situation, some little mental gymnastics that we can utilize to be able to master or further manage our mind a bit. And then there's a lot of action and behavior. So with lifters and athletes in general, they're very action oriented. Tell me what I can do to get better. And so that's very much a process of that. So whether that's getting better sleep, journaling, engaging in deep breathing, kind of muscle relaxation type things, all of those can be beneficial from an action-oriented type of standpoint. And the other is that we're just gonna talk about their moms, and that's not we're not just gonna talk about your mom out there. So there's a lot for some psychologists, and again, what's kind of interesting is if you go to a number of different weightlifting coaches, they're gonna have different philosophies about what creates strength and growth and development within that area. And similarly, if you go to different psychologists, they're going to have different kind of perceptions or philosophies about what they think is going to create a life well lived. And some of those you might jive with, and others you might not necessarily appreciate. So just because you don't like Kanye doesn't mean you might not like rap. Right? There's other rap artists that are out there that people might like. So to kind of shop around, and that's the beauty of the internet these days is folks can kind of get a good feel for who they might meet with and if it matches up with their particular philosophy of life.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point, because I mean, I know like for a long time I dealt with, and I still do occasionally, but for a long time I dealt with severe anxiety, and I gave counseling a shot. I was nervous about it, had a lot of those preconceptions that you had, and the first counselor I met with just did not click with them. And I'm very type A personality, I'm looking for those actionable steps, and it was more along the lines of like just talking general through some things. And I'm glad that I didn't let that, a lot of people I think let their one experience be a reflection of the entire industry, just like anything. And I was able to connect with other people in the future who then it was like, all right, now we're clicking. Now I feel like I made some progress with it. I think a lot of people are very quick to like have one bad experience and be like, well, never doing that again. Right. So, and it's hard too when I think most people's caricature of like a psychologist is like this South Park character with like a sweater with, this is just like, it's not always going to be like that. So, and you have people like yourself who know what it's like to be an athlete. So you can speak to people of, I know this is what you're thinking coming into this, but we can take some solid, concrete, evidence-based steps to actually make progress. I think that's what a lot of athletes are looking for.
For sure. This isn't like rubbing crystals against your forehead or having you lay down and breaking out the pocket watch and stuff. And again, I mean, there's value to, whatever is interested and whatever kind of helps you feel like you're living, like, cool. But the great thing about psychology is it really is the scientific study of mental processes and human behaviors. It's not the placebo effect study of mental processes and human behaviors. Like, we put a lot of these things to empiricism and rigorous scientific research, just like in what we do in here, right? We're not just experimenting with stuff necessarily, unless there's some theoretical grounding or hypothesis that we can kind of test throughout that process. And so the same thing applies with psychology. And the neat thing, again, kind of speaking to that point of shopping around a little bit, is how many different mechanics have we gone through? How many different dentists have we gone through? Sometimes we go to people that click and sometimes we don't, but it doesn't mean that we just stop going and getting our teeth checked or we just stop going and changing our oil. We just got to find the one that we kind of click with, and then it's like, oh, then you got a guy, right? And then you're that person that's, I got a guy for that, right? And then
yeah, absolutely.
So that's what we want to try to get to there.
Yeah, I think that's a great point. So I think, obviously, as you are plenty aware of, with everybody's different. Everyone has their different areas they need improvement on, their strengths or weaknesses mentally, just like they do with other things with their lifts in the gym. But I think there's a few common areas I wanted to hit on that I think most lifters and most athletes in general experience. And there's kind of two ends of the spectrum of performance anxiety when it comes to big competition, kind of hitting the big stage, whether that's, you guys going to a bowl game or whether that's one of our athletes competing on a large stage at the Arnold Classic. And then we have the other end of the spectrum of a whole different set of mental things that I think can hit people when there's nothing going on. So we'll kind of hit on both those. But to start off with the anxiety that can kind of come with preparing for a large competition, what are some ways that athletes can make conscious efforts to be on top of their game mentally when going into a big competition or something that they know is like, this is the big time?
Absolutely. So, well, there's a lot, right? And we can spend sessions kind of working with that very aspect. But just some kind of rudimentary or kind of quick little simple less is more type of ideas is controlling the controllables, right? And so what we ultimately mean by that is how much over the course of the week leading into can the athlete prepare in advance so then when they get to that competition, when they get to that meet, when they get to that stage, they know they don't have to worry about, all right, do I have my gear? Do I have my supplements? Do I have all these different particular things that might have gotten left home back in Detroit or New York or something, and then they're like, damn. So clearing out as much of that mental energy as possible by controlling what you ultimately have control and getting a nice routine leading up to that particular competition. So that's one piece. Another piece that has really kind of taken off in more modern psychology, westernized psychology, is this idea of mindfulness. And mindfulness has been kind of taken from Eastern philosophy and stuff, but it has really been shown to be effective in kind of our own stress management and anxiety management, because what it ultimately is asking us or the athlete to do is embrace and accept the reality that they're anxious and that they're experiencing performance anxiety. So traditionally, one method would be, oh my gosh, I'm thinking negative or I'm having anxious thoughts, so I need to change them into more positive thoughts. So the classic Stuart Smalley, I'm good enough, I'm smart enough, and doggone it, people like me. Well, that's great. That's a great tool to have. In the case of the lifter, they might, oh gosh, this isn't going to go great. I don't feel strong today, or oh, where's my endurance if you're the CrossFit athlete. And so, oh, no, you got this, you can do this, you've done it before. That's all well and good. That's one tool, but we don't build a house with just one tool. So acceptance is kind of our ace in the hole, or ace up the sleeve, that regardless of whether we're feeling it or not, we can just accept, oh, those are my doubtful voices right now, or boy, I'm really anxious right now. And we can just embrace the fact, yeah, I'm going to be anxious, and that's okay. And that doesn't have to disrupt me being able to go out and perform in the way that I want to. So it really is kind of a game changer, because now we have these two strategies of replacing negative thoughts with positive thoughts, and or just being able to embrace, I'm doing something, I'm deliberately putting myself into something that takes me out of my comfort zone. Which is what I signed up for, right? If I didn't want to do this, I should just go back to the couch and not go to the Arnold Classic and not go on stage. And if I'm deliberately putting myself into that, then I need to open myself up to all the good, the uncomfortable, the awkward, the irritating that comes with that, but recognizing and realizing that I know I'm going to be able to make it through despite. So then when you go on to the stage and you start to feel some nerves, rather than being like, oh gosh, what are these nerves doing? I got to flick them away. I got to stiff arm them away. Instead, it's like, oh yeah, I know you. I recognize that I have these nerves, but I can still go out there and perform. So I think those are paramount. Kind of this preparation leading into can create that confidence, but then this acceptance piece can really allow you to roll with anything that might happen and recognize that you can still perform the performances that you want to perform.
Yeah, that's great. I mean, I think to speak to the mindfulness, I think that was a big thing that really helped me when I started to come around to understand that concept. Because I think it goes again to like different personality types too. Of some people, they'll look at somebody who, and maybe they do and they're just not showing it, but they'll see somebody who doesn't visibly look like they have nerves in a situation. And then when they feel nerves in that situation, they panic. And it's like anxiety tends to be this downward spiral where, back when, before I started focusing a little bit more on that mindfulness mindset, I would be approaching a big lift, big stage, something, whatever, and feel that anxiety. And then it was like panicking because I had anxiety, and then it's more anxiety. And then it's like, next thing you know, you're a mess. And especially with competition, really in any sport, but we see it a lot in powerlifting, there's always different variables that are going to be unexpected. So if you're in a place where like as soon as something doesn't go the way you visualized it, you're going to freak out, it's like it's a bad place to be. And so I think that mindfulness is just huge for athletes. And I think understanding, be able to sit there, and when I started to be able to look at a situation and be like, you know what, I'm about to get under 800 pounds, this is normal for me to feel a little nervous about this, but I can go in spite of that feeling and still do it, I think is huge for people.
Totally. And I like to even break it down as the sunburn effect. So if you go down to Panama City or Miami or something, and the first day you get a little overzealous, like, I just want to get out to the beach. I don't want to put any sunscreen on. I'm like notorious for this. So then what happens is you get burnt. So you have this burn, which is uncomfortable, it's irritating, it's awkward, it hurts a little bit. But is that sunburn going to get in the way of you going out to dinner, or going to the bar, or going to a boogie board on the waves, or connect in some type of way with other people that are on the beach? No, right? Again, it might be irritating, it might be awkward, but you can still engage in what you ultimately want to engage in. So I think of anxiety and some of these self-doubt types of voices that come up from time to time as the sunburn effect, where is it ideal? No, not necessarily, but can you still do what you ultimately have to do and lift 800 pounds? Hell yeah, you can.
Yeah, that's great. I think the analogies like that are just great for helping people understand some of those concepts that can be a little tougher to kind of get an idea of. So kind of on the other end of the spectrum with, performance anxiety and nerves when it comes to big competition, we see a lot, and I've seen this myself, and I know I've talked to a lot of other lifters that deal with the same thing, of generalized kind of anxiousness and a lot of depression when there's not competition going on. So whether that is because they're recovering from an injury, whether they're aging and not able to compete the same things that they did before, or for a lot of people, the week after a meet is like this crash of like you were, especially like whether the meet went good or bad, it's like you're on this super high adrenaline, nervous system's firing, and then it crashes in the week after. And for people who aren't even getting back into the gym the week after, you're going into like basically your idle hands for a week and just kind of time to think and make yourself a little crazy. So for athletes that are struggling with anxiousness and depression during those down times, what are some ways that they can kind of work through some of that and not let it get them carried away?
Sure. So one is kind of diversifying the human portfolio. So one of the traits that make athletes such great athletes is their kind of focus, their obsessiveness, and their ability to narrowly focus on being great at their sport, which as a result can sometimes run the risk of making us a one-trick pony. So if you take away that element of your life, then you're left with nothing else. So for me personally, you could have a bar stool with kind of just one leg, or you can have a bar stool with four. And if the bar stool with one leg, if that gets cut out, all right, you're going to crash. And whereas if you have the four legs and one gets cut out, well, it's going to be a little bit wobbly, but it's not necessarily going to fall over immediately. So speaking to this kind of letdown after a performance, essentially that's like telling Van Gogh, hey, give me your paintbrush. You're not allowed to paint for a week. And you're like, are you kidding me? No, I got to go out there and paint. Or you take Eric Clapton's guitar away from him. No, that's not a good idea. So the same thing kind of applies with the lifting sports or the CrossFit or whatever. You prepare so much for this performance and it goes away. Well, essentially that's just taking away this part of your identity, this major part of your identity. How do you essentially reduce the likelihood of that? Diverse your human portfolio. So not only do you have lifting that's going well in your life, but you have these other interests that you can kind of turn to when lifting is not as paramount or prioritized in your particular training plan. So I would suggest to people, go find some other interests, right? Go find some other things that they might be passionate about. Maybe not to the level of working out and lifting and those types of athletic performances, but something that can still resonate and take their mind off of the fact that they're not engaged in that. Taking a vacation, doing some other things work-related wise, or whatever that might be. I think the power of acceptance and mindfulness comes into it as well. So being able to recognize, after this performance, shit's going to be hard for me, right? I lose my energy, I lose my feelings of setting a goal, my self-actualization. So I can recognize that, realize that that's part of the kind of the training process and development, and knowing that I'm going to get through this and it's temporary, because eventually I'll get back in there again and start working out. Moving along with kind of that diversifying the human portfolio is setting a goal in some other aspect of your life. So we all obviously want to feel like we're continuing moving and chasing that carrot. So if it's not lifting, can we apply that to something else immediately or shortly thereafter? And then finally, I call it mastering the pit. So I'm not a huge NASCAR fan. I don't watch a ton of NASCAR. But you think about the great drivers, the great teams, not only do they have a great driver that's fast as they're going around the track, they have a great car and stuff, but what they also do is they master the pit, right? And so they're going to have to take a pit stop. All drivers take a pit stop, every single one of them. The better drivers, the better teams, the more successful drivers and teams, they make the most of that pit. So for somebody that's coming off a big competition, or they're coming off their competitive season, that's their pit stop. And so whether that's due to an injury or whether that's due to the season completion, how are you going to master the pit? Is that working on the mental strategies? Is that focusing on some other aspect of your life that's going to bring you value and passion? How do you as an individual master that pit? So then, no matter whether you're intensely engaged in competition or not, you have these different things that you're either interested in, are working towards, or are passionate about, and that really helps reduce the likelihood that we're going to find ourselves into some troubled waters.
Yeah, I think that's the priorities, and having other things, like you said, not being a one-trick pony, I think is huge, and I think that applies to a lot of the people we work with, because a lot of the primary strength athletes in particular that we serve here at Elite FTS are people who rank training as one of their top 5 priorities in life. Many are not, it's not their number one priority, but some it is. And it's always one of those top ones. And I think it's a tendency, and I think a lot of athletes, we've all been there, where it goes from maybe even being 1 or 2 or 3 to being one and the only one. And it's just setting you up for tough times. And I did last year when I did an anonymous survey for a lot of our readers about, mental health and different things. And a lot of people in the kind of giving feedback said of like, training's my only therapy that I need, blah, blah, blah. Training is my one outlet. That's all I have. And they were kind of saying it in like as if, that's the good thing, which partially is. And then on the same aspect in one of the other questions saying how like things are really bad for them mentally, like they're in a dark place. And I think there's some correlation there of like if it's all you have and then you lose it, even for a week, a couple weeks, couple months, or, you have to surgery, something like that. I mean, things can get bad real quick for people. So I think there's a lot to be said about, it doesn't make you any less dedicated of an athlete to have some other things that support you during those downtimes.
100%. And if anything, I think it can make you a better athlete because you can reduce the pressure that you put on yourself in the gym, and you can come from a motivation of like, wow, I just really want to do this because I value it, versus, wow, I really want to do this because I feel this sense that I have to, right? Again, going with the stock analogy, is if you only had one stock and you put all your money into that stock, you're going to be checking that stock every day. You're going to be nervous wreck about that stock. Whereas if you have 5 different stocks, then one's not really going as well as you wanted it to, or they didn't report any quarterly kind of finances, so I have money in it, but I'm not that worried about it. I'll get to it when it becomes important. That just reduces significantly the psychological distress associated with that. So absolutely, diversify.
Great, yeah, and for kind of in speaking to what you do in counseling, if we have some athletes that want to pursue counseling, meeting with somebody, talking to a sports psychologist, what are some things that you think they can approach that opportunity or situation in a way that'll make it the most successful? And obviously, like you said before, it's going to may take a little shopping around, but what are some ways that they can go into that situation ready to make it the best possible?
Yeah, it's a great question. I think an open mind, first off, because what a psychologist, I think, mostly is really helpful for is being able to unlock aspects of the mind to view our situations a little bit differently. Because we tend to just come at things from one direction. That's our human nature and that's our personality. And so we're going to view life from a particular lens. What a good psychologist is going to do is encourage you to put on different types of glasses to view your situation a little bit differently. So being open to those potentially different philosophies is very, very important, and then being able to integrate those into your own life in a way that is meaningful for you. So one is the open-mindedness, and then 2 is being able to being willing to integrate and apply the strategies, or whether those are mental gymnastics or actual behavioral interventions, on your own to be able to work with that. And I think that's one of the downsides to some extent about sports psychology and working on psychological mental skills to help performance, is it's not the sexiest thing in the world to do. So lifters in particular, it's very active, right? So you're going to get on this machine and you're going to crush it and you feel that sense of accomplishment. Sitting down for 5 minutes and visualizing yourself going through your training routine or your performance or your lifts, people get antsy doing that, right? It's not fun, they feel static, but if you can start viewing that mental training as just as important as the physical training, or view it as a way of something that I can get better at, and you can literally do 3 sets of 1 minute visualization, right? So you can even make it like that type of thing. So being able to incorporate that and integrate that, even though it's not always the most fun kind of things to do. And then I guess the third piece is just kind of being able to accept what might come up in the therapy session, and being able to kind of roll with what directions that may go. Some people might come into the office thinking that I'm just going to strictly talk about performance, and then the next thing they know, they're talking about how they're stressed out at their job and such. And so recognizing that just because you go to a psychologist to talk about this particular topic doesn't mean that all these other topics are off limits, that you can use that time any way that one wants. So open-mindedness, integration, and using it effectively, I think, are 3 things that can very, very much be valuable for a new client.
That's awesome. And I think that'll be super helpful for people if they choose to pursue that, so they don't just go in not knowing not knowing even what to be thinking going into it. So one of the things I want in all these different interviews that I do in this series is to have people always be able to take, and I think we've taken already some great things, but some tangible take-home piece of advice that as soon as they're done watching, they can go and do. So obviously different athletes everyone's different. There's context to advice you give to everybody, but what do you think is one thing that generally all athletes can do on a daily basis to get in the habit of that'll help improve their performance and their mental health?
Yes. So basically, I think I have two kind of major responses to this. One is embracing courage. Okay, so Brene Brown is a psychological researcher, and so she's really got on kind of this like courage kick. And I think courage is great because, again, it's another ace in the hole, and the fact that if I feel anxious, or if I'm uncertain about something, or if I have that inner self-critic that could potentially derail me from reaching the goals that I want to reach, the individual with courage is going to do that despite. So if we think about the hero's journey is this concept. If you have read any book, watched any movie, even some songs, any of those things that are worth a damn, there is inherent conflict and struggle within that. And that is what creates an audience member that is on the edge of their seat, wanting to know what's going to happen to this person. And are they going to make it despite the fact that the villain just took the princess, right? Like, are they going to, oh my gosh, I can't believe that happened. Are they going to keep moving despite? And the hero in these stories has courage to take that next step, despite of how they're feeling, despite of whether they have a broken leg, despite of whether they're kind of uncertain about it, they keep going. Now, that's not to say to keep lifting if you have a broken leg, but to have the courage to step into a situation, step through the anxiety, to give yourself an opportunity to do what you ultimately want to do. So courage. The other piece is compassion. I think we all as human beings, a lot of us, are way too hard on ourselves. And I don't think that reducing that has to take away our vigorousness towards performance and making ourselves better, but I think we can be more gentle with ourselves in the process. If you miss a lift, does that mean you're a piece of shit? Or does that mean that, okay, I have an opportunity to continue to get better? If a competition goes the way that you don't want it to, all right, and you take second or you don't even place, does that mean you're any less of a human being? No, right? It means that on that particular day, you didn't bring it as a lifter, and that's all right. So showing ourselves a little bit more compassion, I think can go a really, really long way, and then we can just enjoy performing and lifting and growing and developing in a much more positive type of manner, and it can be just as motivating. Putting all of this into kind of a three very easy takeaway. There's this book, Everything I Know I Learned in Kindergarten, and so I'm going to keep it very easy. If you have something to think about, or if you need a particular strategy, just think A, B, C. A stands for acceptance, all right, which we've talked about a lot, right? So if a negative thought comes up or you're feeling some physiological distress, accepting it, wrapping our arms around it, patting on its head, hey, thanks for showing up, I acknowledge that you're here. But we also want to be able to shake the Etch-a-Sketch clear and be able to think about something else. So B stands for taking a deep breath. The breath is the Etch-a-Sketch. We shake it up, it leaves. It's the dry eraser board that we're able to dry off to release whatever those distracting initial thoughts were that we accepted or feelings were that we accepted. We take a deep breath to clear those out. And then finally, C, we choose something performance enhancing to focus on. So that might be something that builds confidence. Hey, I can do this, I got this, I've done it before. It could be something that helps with composure. Hey, just relax, you're okay, show compassion, be courageous. Or it might be something with concentration, focusing on a particular technique or reminding yourself, hey, make sure you keep your head up when you do this particular lift. So ABC, accept, breathe, and choose something performance enhancing to focus on. If you take nothing else away necessarily, other than the fact that sports psychology can be something valuable, but just a very simple kind of exercise, ABC I think can get a lot of people, give a lot of people value.
Awesome. Thanks, man. I think that's really good, tangible stuff. And I think that's, like we talked about before, lifters are generally looking for something concrete that they can, they can get their head around and take to make themselves better. So obviously we could take any of the topics that we went over today and go forever about them. But I think this was a good introduction to a lot of the things that you do in your industry, of how this can apply to improve mental performance, mental health in athletes, and then their overall performance. And in the future, I'd love to have you back again. We could talk a little more in depth about some of these topics. In the meantime, what are some, where can people kind of find more information about what you do, resources that you have? Is there anywhere, people should contact you if they have questions?
Yeah, absolutely. So I have a website. It's www.mindurance.org, and so it'll be in the show notes, but it's mind, M-I-N-D, URANCE, so kind of a little hybrid between mind and endurance, very purposeful. And so you can shoot me an email, they can give me a call, so plenty of ways to get in touch. There's also, I have a daily blog, roughly a daily blog on Instagram as well, which is @myendurance. So there's plenty of ways to get in touch with me. In my private practice, it's actually all online. So if the people are looking for mental coaching, regardless of where you're at, I can meet with folks. So it's a really kind of cool, valuable resource, and a lot of stuff that I've been proud of developing and pursuing a bit more too. And what's great about this particular population is I suspect it's a little bit of untapped too, and so there's plenty of opportunities to help develop the mental skills in these particular types of athletic endeavors.
Yeah, absolutely, man. I mean, that's the reason I want to start this, is because we got a lot of people that they could benefit from a lot of this stuff, and a lot from the expertise you and a lot of these other professionals have, in addition to the other resources that we already provide. So for anyone interested in contacting Steve or getting more information, we'll have that information with the video and the audio. Also, if you have topics or questions or guests that you'd like to see on future episodes of this, you can contact me either through social media. All my handles are @JoeScalero, or probably the best way is going to be just through email at joescalero@gmail.com, and I'll have that down in the comments as well. We're going to get into some good topics that I think are going to apply to a lot of people, and some intense stuff too. I want to talk with some different doctors about how different medications, different drugs can all factor into this, different other deeper areas of things we talked about today. So I think it'll be really helpful for a lot of people. So thanks again, Steve, for coming and talking today, and I appreciate you taking the time, man.
Absolutely. Hey, my pleasure, Joe, and anytime you want to have me back, we got a lot to talk about. So,
awesome. Thanks, dude.
Keep up the good work.
Thanks.
All right, man.